A man invented the telephone 16 years before Alexander Graham Bell. He had working prototypes. He had witnesses. He had everything except $10. And that $10 is the reason you've never heard his name. History didn't erase these people by accident. It erased them through a series of very specific, very human failures. Money, timing, race, gender, and in at least one case, a train that arrived without a passenger. Today, I'm going to show you 10 moments where history quietly handed credit to the wrong person. And I'll save the most disturbing one for last, because it involves a Nobel Prize and a device that, according to the original patent, couldn't actually work. Let's start with the telephone, because this one has a number attached to it so precise it's almost insulting. Antonio Meucci, an Italian immigrant living in New York, couldn't afford the $250 fee for a full patent, so he filed a patent caveat, a temporary notice of invention, in 1871.
A caveat wasn't a full patent.
It was a placeholder, a document that said, "I'm working on this, notify me if anyone else files something similar." He paid the $10 annual renewal fee twice, but by 1874, he was living on public assistance and could not afford the third renewal. That's it. That's the entire story. Not a conspiracy, not corporate sabotage. A $10 fee that wasn't there. It is known that Meucci demonstrated his device in 1860, that a description appeared in New York's Italian-language newspaper, and that Western Union received working models from Meucci, but reportedly lost them. And here's the detail that makes this even harder to sit with. Meucci had sent his prototypes to the Western Union Telegraph Company for testing, and the company later claimed to have lost them. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell, who had a laboratory in the same building as Meucci's missing equipment, filed his own patent for the telephone. Congress itself would later acknowledge, if Antonio Meucci could have paid the $10 fee to maintain his caveat, the Bell patent could not have been granted. That resolution passed in 2002, more than a century too late. $10. 16 years of work. A congressional resolution that arrived after everyone who lived it was already gone. The telephone story is infuriating. But what happened to the inventor of cinema is something else entirely. And I want you to hold on to that Nobel Prize detail I mentioned at the start, because we're getting there. In October 1888, Louis Le Prince filmed moving picture sequences of family members in Leeds using his single-lens camera and Eastman's paper negative film. His most notable surviving work is the Roundhay Garden scene, a brief sequence shot in 1888 that features family members walking in a garden. This film, along with others he shot in Leeds, predates the earliest known films by Thomas Edison and the Lumiere brothers, positioning Le Prince as the true pioneer of motion pictures. Content with his creation, Le Prince had the first public exhibition of his work scheduled in New York during September 1890.
Yet he never made it,
disappearing just days beforehand, never to be seen again. On September 16, Le Prince waved farewell to his brother at the Dijon station as he boarded the Dijon to Paris express train. When the train arrived at the Parisian station later that day, Le Prince's friends were met with an unusual circumstance. Louis didn't get off the train. He wasn't on the train, and nor were any trace of his luggage or belongings. Both the French police and Scotland Yard launched a search that yielded no results. There was no trace of Le Prince or his luggage. No witnesses reported anything suspicious, and his body was never found. Now, I'm not going to tell you Edison killed Le Prince. Nobody knows what happened on that train. What I am going to tell you is what happened next, because this is the part almost no one talks about. Le Prince's widow and son, Adolphe, were keen to advance Louis's cause as the inventor of cinematography. In 1898, Adolphe appeared as a witness for the defense in a court case brought by Thomas Edison against the American Mutoscope Company, in which Edison claimed to be the first and sole inventor of cinematography. In 1902, 2 years after Le Prince's son Adolphe had testified in the suit, he was found shot dead on Fire Island, New York. The death was ruled accidental. His mother went to her grave, believing it was murder. A missing inventor, a dead witness, and a patent empire that survived both. If you Google who invented film today, the top result is world-renowned American inventor Thomas Edison. For others, the French Lumière brothers might spring to mind. Louis Le Prince gets a footnote, if he gets anything at all. Now let's talk about someone who made a single mistake that cost him 30 years of his life, and this is the one that connects back to that Nobel Prize. In November 1957, while at Columbia University, Gordon Gould conceived the laser, documenting the concept in a notarized notebook and coining the term LASER, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Aware of the significance of his work, Gould wrote his ideas in a notebook in early November 1957 and had it notarized, but due to bad legal advice, he believed he had to produce a working model before applying for a patent. You don't. You never did. You just needed to describe it. After working intensely for a week, Gould took a laboratory notebook full of sketches, equations, and calculations to a candy store in the Bronx. When he got there, he asked the owner, who also happened to be a notary public, to stamp each of the 9 pages he'd filled out. He thought that was step 1. He thought step 2 was building the thing. So he waited. Believing that he first needed to have a working prototype, he waited until 1959 to apply for a patent. But by that time, Townes and physicist Arthur Schawlow had already filed such an application, and his was rejected. Here is the detail that historians of science still find remarkable. Charles Townes received the Nobel Prize in Physics, in part for his work on the laser. He became one of the most celebrated scientists of the 20th century. And yet, while Theodore Maiman is credited with building the first working laser at Hughes Research Lab in 1960, Townes and Schawlow's original patent application described a device that, in the view of many who later examined it, could not have functioned as described. Gould, meanwhile, had the notebook. The real one. The one with the actual physics. With his notarized notebook as his main piece of evidence, Gould fought Townes and Schawlow's award of the laser patent. After many years of litigation, he prevailed, and in 1977 he was issued the first of his U.S. patents. After a 30-year patent battle, Gould ultimately secured 48 patents, including optical and collisional pumping, earning millions of dollars from licensing. 30 years. By the time he won, the laser had already changed the world, and the world had already decided who invented it. Now let's go further back, because the next story isn't about money or paperwork. It's about a woman who was physically present in the room and still wasn't allowed to speak. The year is 1856. Eunice Newton Foote attended a scientific conference in Albany, New York, the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She had conducted careful experiments showing that certain gases, particularly carbon dioxide, trapped heat from the sun more than others. She had described the basic mechanism of what we now call the greenhouse effect. She couldn't present her own paper. A male secretary from the Smithsonian Institution read it on her behalf while she sat in the audience. 3 years later, an Irish physicist named John Tyndall conducted more elaborate experiments, reached the same conclusions, wrote them up himself, presented them himself, and received full credit for discovering the greenhouse effect. There is a crater on the Moon named after Tyndall. Foote remained completely unknown to science historians for more than 150 years, until an amateur historian stumbled onto a single mention of her paper in an old conference proceedings document. He had never heard of her before. No one had. Historians of science have a name for this pattern. They call it the Matilda Effect, the systematic under-recognition of women's contributions to science and invention. It's named after Matilda Jocelyn Gage, who first wrote about the phenomenon in 1870, and it shows up everywhere you look. Susan Hibbard patented the feather duster in 1876, but first had to take her own husband to court to establish that the patent actually belonged to her, not a stranger, her husband. The man she lived with had tried to claim her invention as his own, and the law at the time gave him every reasonable chance to succeed. These aren't isolated cases. They are a pattern so consistent it has its own academic name. Now let's talk about someone who won in court and still lost in history. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know this kind of story doesn't have a clean ending. Granville T. Woods was a black engineer born in Ohio in 1856. He had almost no formal education, but taught himself electrical engineering through books and by working as an engine operator on railroads. He eventually held over 50 patents in steam boilers, electrical railway systems, and communications. His most important invention was a device called the multiplex telegraph, which allowed moving trains to communicate with railway stations in real time. Before Woods, trains couldn't send or receive messages while in motion. Collisions happened because no one knew where another train was on the track. Woods's invention directly saved lives. Thomas Edison saw the patent and wanted it. He filed a legal challenge claiming he had invented the same device first. The case went to court. Woods won. Edison's challenge failed. And then Edison did something unexpected. He offered Woods a job, which Woods declined. By all accounts, Woods preferred his independence. He continued inventing, continued patenting, and continued being almost completely ignored by the history books. Edison, who lost the court case, remained one of the most famous inventors who ever lived. Woods, who won, appears in maybe one paragraph of most general history textbooks, usually under a heading like Other Notable Inventors. Now, let me give you one more example of how this system worked in practice. Because it's so calculated, it almost reads like a strategy guide. Thomas Edison filed what's called a patent caveat over 100 times across his career. A caveat is essentially a placeholder, a document that says, I am working on something in this area, so if anyone else files a similar patent, notify me first. It costs less than a full patent. It gives you time to finish the actual invention, and it creates a legal paper trail that suggests you were there first, even if you weren't. Edison used this system expertly. He would sketch out a concept for a device, sometimes barely more than an idea, file a caveat, and then wait. If someone else built a working version and started moving toward a patent, Edison's caveat gave him legal grounds to contest it. He could then refine his own version, claim prior intent, and move to secure the rights. LePrince, meanwhile, had built a working single-lens camera and projector before anyone else. He had actual footage. But it was a highly competitive time, with LePrince, the Lumieres, and Edison just 3 of the names pushing to get patents over the line and first, with dozens of other inventors and corporations racing to establish themselves as the pioneer of moving image. Le Prince didn't have a caveat filed in the United States, and he didn't have a legal team ready to move the moment his demonstration was threatened. Edison had both. It's not illegal, it's not even particularly unusual in the patent world, but when you place it next to the story of a man who boarded a train and never arrived, while carrying his camera and his film, it becomes one of those historical details that sits uncomfortably in the back of your mind. Before I get to the final point, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment below with the name of any forgotten inventor you've heard of that I didn't mention today, because I guarantee this channel will cover them. And if you want to watch more videos exactly like this one, where we pull apart the mechanics of how history actually gets written, the next video is already queued up for you. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Here's what all of these stories have in common, and this is the thing I want you to actually walk away with. Meucci's story is not only one of innovation, but also of historical omission. Financial hardship prevented him from securing a full patent, paving the way for Alexander Graham Bell's 1876 patent, and a century-long debate over the telephone's origins. But that same sentence could describe Gould. It could describe Le Prince. It could describe Foote and Hibbard and Woods. The mechanism is almost identical every time. None of them lacked ability. Meucci built a working telephone. Le Prince made real films. Gould recorded his idea and design plans in his notebook, and in doing so, coined the acronym LASER and described the essential elements for constructing one. Foote conducted careful, reproducible experiments. Woods won in the highest court available to him. Every single one of them was genuinely skilled. What they lacked was something much more boring. Access, money, the right social position at the right moment, the knowledge of which form to file and when, a $10 renewal fee, the legal right to present your own paper in public. And in most cases, there was someone else nearby who had all of those things, even if they didn't have the original idea. Only in 2002 did the US Congress formally acknowledge Meucci's contribution, a symbolic act that arrived too late to alter mainstream historical memory. Despite Le Prince's pioneering work in cinematography, his disappearance and lack of public exhibition led to him being largely forgotten until the 1920s. Gould fought for 30 years before securing his patents. History isn't a record of what happened, it's a record of what got written down, by whom, and who could afford to keep the filing fee current. Meucci, Le Prince, Gould, Foote, Hibbard, Woods. Say those names out loud once before you close this video, because the system that erased them is still running. It still rewards the person with the patent lawyer over the person with the idea. It still credits the person who publishes first over the person who discovered first. And it still handed a Nobel Prize in at least one documented case, while the man with the working notebook waited in courtrooms for 30 years. If that bothers you, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of history this channel is here to cover.